First of all, thank you, CIJA, for organizing this most important conference. I'm honored to be a part of this gathering. My name's Heidi Berger, and I am the child of Holocaust survivors. I'm also the president and founder of the Foundation for Genocide Education based in Montreal. You know, I had a great speech prepared about my personal story fighting anti-Semitism, and suddenly, with the calculated, planned, and brutal attack unleashed on innocent citizens in Israel, it didn't seem that impressive or important anymore. How can one person really make a difference when faced with the enormity of the anti-Semitic hate those Hamas terrorists were most certainly taught as children? But the more I thought about it, it became clear to me that each person can and must take on the responsibility of fighting anti-Semitism. Even more importantly, preventing anti-Semitism from developing through education. I want to ask you a question. If someone came up to you and begged you to do something about the ignorance of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, what would you do? This scenario happened to me, and I took this request as a personal challenge to effect change. But I had a good role model who inspired me to make this decision, my late mother. She is why I created the foundation. The reason was to honor her legacy as a survivor, as an educator, and as a change maker. My parents survived the worst expression of anti-Semitic hate. My mother witnessed her father and brother being forcibly taken to a prison outside her ghetto in Poland where they were shot in an open pit. My mother witnessed the gang rape and murder of her best friend, Sarah. And worst of all, my mother, while hiding in an attic, she saw her own mother being dragged out of hiding, lined up against a wall, and shot by Nazi collaborator soldiers. This past week, while watching in horror the videos of innocent women, children, babies, and the elderly in Israel being dragged out of their homes and tossed into trucks, and young adults being gunned down at a musical festival, I kept thinking, this is exactly the same thing that my mother witnessed more than 75 years ago in her ghetto. Do you know what motivated my mother to keep living through the hell of the Holocaust? Her own mother kept telling her that she would survive and that she would tell their story to the world. And she did survive, and she won her war against Hitler. But anti-Semitism did not end when the Holocaust was over, as we all know. My parents witnessed violence and prejudice even after the war. They immigrated to Canada to escape this hate and raised a family in the small country town of St. Agathe, north of Montreal, where I was born. My parents forged new lives in Canada, but of course, old fears do not die. My father was so anxious that a genocide could happen in Quebec, he asked his patient, who was a local priest, to give me a Catholic birth certificate, which I still have today. I like to say that while my friends had fake IDs to get into bars, I had a fake birth certificate. When my mother wanted to buy her first house in St. Agathe, she knew that no one at that time would sell property to a Jew. So she put a cross around her neck, pretended she wasn't Jewish, and that is how she bought her first home. Talk about misappropriating a religious symbol. We tried to ignore the subtle and not so subtle signs of anti-Semitism that were common in Canada at that time. My brothers were regularly beaten up in school for being Jews, and of course it wasn't unusual to see signs outside local hotels that read "No Jews, no dogs," or "Gentiles only." We heard plenty of insensitive comments at school. My principal once accused a Jewish classmate who was overweight of being a glutton because Jews had been starved in concentration camps. And we were supposed to laugh it off as a joke. but we all know what normalizing anti-Semitism leads to. Like most survivors, my parents didn't speak out about anti-Semitism or their past. It was only when my mother went to Germany twice and testified in 1981 against the commandant that had supervised the killings of thousands of people in her village that she made a decision that changed her course of life. Despite overwhelming evidence, the Nazi general was declared not guilty. My mother wasn't accepting it. She decided then and there to render justice to her family and all those who were murdered by telling the world the truth of what happened during the Holocaust. She became a teacher at a Jewish school in Montreal. She taught English to Russian immigrants. She led a choir, and she wrote a book, Witness to Horror. She told her story to thousands of students and adults so that the horrors of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust could not be allowed to happen again. Before my mother died in 2006, she asked me repeatedly to go into schools to tell her story. But at that time, I was busy raising a family, working as a film producer and part-time university teacher, and I didn't feel I had the time. But when I watched her once give her powerful lecture to the student audience, I knew then that I had to continue her mission. For the first time, I really saw the impact her story had on students, and it completely changed my mind. So I put together an interactive, bilingual, 50-minute presentation using her testimonials, which I have given since 2010 to French and English schools throughout Quebec. I was like a traveling saleswoman taking my laptop from school to school. But instead of selling cosmetics like the Avon lady, I was sharing stories of the worst genocide in history. I remember vividly the effect the presentation had on those students, not to mention the teachers. Many would be crying and hugging me afterwards. I was also astounded that so few students knew anything about the Holocaust or about genocide. Teachers constantly were telling me that students are graduating from high school not even knowing what the word genocide means, even today. And teachers were afraid to teach the topic, and most told me they do not know how to teach it, even today. At a presentation in Chateauguay, Quebec, a Black ethics teacher came up to me and said, "You have to do something about this." This is a decision-making moment that was the trigger for me. I felt challenged by this request, but how would I reach every student? I couldn't go to hundreds of high schools alone. I heard my mom's voice saying, "You could do it." So that's when I decided to create the Foundation for Genocide Education as a vehicle to advocate for major change in our high school curriculum. We started with the Quebec government. What a tough place to start. I'm not going to lie, it was an uphill battle. I faced many refusals and outright denials by government officials. One official in the education ministry told me, "We're not spies to go into schools to see if it's taught." But you know what? Try saying no to genocide education to a child of Holocaust survivors. So after years of persistence, petitions, meetings with cabinet ministers and education ministers, we finally made a breakthrough. We did it. The foundation is the driving force behind the first online teaching guide in Quebec that helps teachers educate their students about this sensitive subject. 600 high schools and 310,000 students. Now, funded by the Quebec Education Ministry and written by professors by the Université de Laval and the Université of Sherbrooke with input from the Montreal Holocaust Museum, the guide highlights 9 recognized UN and Canadian genocides, and for the first time in schools, the genocide of our Indigenous peoples. It includes testimonial and instructional videos produced by our foundation. We're bringing it to the rest of the country. the US, and Dubai through our discussions with the director of the first and only museum in the Arab world with a permanent exhibit on the Holocaust. When I first began the foundation, I promised Holocaust survivors I would make sure teachers educate their students about the Holocaust. History keeps repeating itself because we still have not learned the lessons of the past. Not only are we teaching these lessons through this guide, but we are now working on a separate chapter on anti-Semitism. We started off with Erwin Kotler, and I'm hoping he's going to help us right to the end. Students must learn the history of anti-Semitism to understand that it did not end after the Holocaust, but it's thriving in many different forms today, fueling the terrorist actions of organizations like Hamas. Their stated aim is the destruction of Israel, and their charter is filled with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. There is no better way to empower our young people to call out these lies than with giving them knowledge. It has to be done. We also know there is nothing as powerful as storytelling to teach about history. This is why we offer live presentations to high schools by survivors from the 9 genocides in the guide and descendants of survivors, including 5 children, obviously, of Holocaust survivors. These presentations are very powerful. Listening to the testimonials of our presenters have made me realize how little many of us know about other communities' experience with hate and intolerance. Did you know while I was growing up in St. Agathe, I had no idea that 9 hours away in Spanish Ontario, Indigenous children my age were experiencing the horrors of residential schools. This has had a lasting impact on me and has made me even more passionate about our mission. That mission is to make the study of genocide a compulsory part of the curriculum. It has been a long step-by-step process over the years, but we cannot wait any longer. With the honoring in Parliament of a former member of the Waffen-SS and the cold-blooded murder in Israel of men, women, and children on a major Jewish holiday, the message is more urgent than ever before. We must make the Holocaust and genocide education mandatory now. If not now, then when? What we are hearing tonight are the stories of individuals fighting anti-Semitism, but no one can do it alone. I have a team of dedicated staff and volunteers, some of whom are here tonight. I have members of the many communities, Armenian, Rwandan, Cambodian, and First Nations that have worked alongside me. We must continue to do this work together. We cannot do it alone. Similarly, the Jewish community cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. We need the support of the non-Jewish communities, just as we supported others throughout history whenever injustice and racism reared their ugly heads. As well, all Jewish organizations must present a united front in this fight. The fight against anti-Semitism is everybody's fight, because whenever we allow the language of us and them to go unchallenged, it festers and grows. Our duty is to share and teach, and this is clear. That is why anti-Semitism will never defeat us, because we will face it at every turn, forcefully when we must, but always in the spirit of trying to shine a light on darkness. Ignorance is so often at the root of hate, and education is the most powerful tool we have so that hope can grow from darkness. We can and must be all change makers. As I always say at the end of my school presentation, the fight against anti-Semitism begins in the classroom. Thank you.